Welcome to this chess video, everyone. This is a really special video because I have just reached 2100 rapid rating on chess.com. And so after celebrating this milestone a little bit, let's take a look at some of the games that helped get me there. So come on, I'll take you along on this journey, and it might even help you improve your own chess. It started like this, and the game was going pretty standard so far. Of course, that's just the King's Indian defense by different move order. I played the Zamish variation. Castling is very common. And then we end up playing this variation, which is slightly less popular from Black's perspective. Usually White will plant their queen on d2. And long term, they might even castle queenside. But of course, White plans to play a pawn storm against Black's king, and so it's a very sharp position, but this is something I'm familiar with. Now, as alluded to, that is more or less how this game went. Knight g3, trying to get h4 and h5. I don't want to make this an analysis video, but I will show a slight improvement that's actually really instructional, which is to take here, and then almost dare Black to try and attack White's king. Yeah, we've won a pawn, and they don't mind the entire open files that we'll have. We'll probably still castle queenside, or we may leave the king in the center. And yeah, this is as dangerous as it looks. I didn't want to go into this in the game, even if I would have won a pawn. So the real game continued. I captured this way, which even better was just continuing the pawn storm. But then we get into some really complicated imbalances here, going like this. Bishop h6, and the engine already likes Black playing rook captures b2. Not afraid to decoy White's queen and then get back a little material, but give White open files on the queen side and Black a much safer king on the king side. Instead of that, we continued this way, and then they capture on b2, and objectively best was for White to actually just take this. But in the game, I actually didn't even see that I could take that rook. I don't know why, it lapsed the judgment or something. And I played here instead, wanting to keep my bishop defended. Bishop captures d4 would have been really strong for Black, but instead they sacrificed the rook, maybe thinking that they got away with the rook hanging on b2. But I take back, and then I blow the advantage very shortly after. I played bishop captures g7, thinking I'm getting rid of their strong bishop that helps guard their king, and I'm up material so I don't mind trading. But what I overlook is this in-between move, knight to d3 check. And yes, I just got my queen and king forked. Of course, that would probably be the end of this game. But no, instead I play on. I don't mind playing without a queen. If you're unsure how to play without a queen, you can take a look at this chess video here where I explain how I do it. But from here on out, Black is definitely much better. And so let's teleport several moves further. And you can see I'm down by 8 points about 20 moves later. My knight is under attack. I move it here. And then for some reason they play h4. And I just take back the hanging queen. It's a real roller coaster of emotions. I went from completely lost to now actually winning. And so can I hold this? Well, it goes like this. I'm trying to relocate my knight. But bishop g2 is a really strong idea. I don't want to take because my rook is my biggest asset, and if they go here, yes, my king can stop this pawn, but my knight alone cannot force checkmate. Black actually has a very strong plan of rushing their king all the way over to b2, attacking this pawn, and then their g-pawn might actually be really dangerous. In a sense, giving up the rook would be giving up my winning chances, I felt. I spent about half of my remaining time on this move trying to find the win, and unfortunately, I could not find it, and I didn't want to lose on time. I ended up trading here. Now it's a dead equal position according to the engine. They take here, and exactly as anticipated, it goes just like that. This king starts rushing all the way over to b2, and this game did end in a draw. Now let's go back to here, the critical moment. I lost my queen, I got back the queen, then the game ends in a draw, real roller coaster here. But the win that I had to find was pushing my pawn. a3 or a4 are both good, but it's natural to put it on a dark square because they have a light squared bishop. And Black is almost out of moves. They can't really bring their king to b2 because of my rook. But then the real test here was pawn to h2. And this is the move that I missed. It's actually the very surprising knight to f5 check. If they simply move their king, then the knight goes here, guards the promotion square, and we're very happy to sacrifice the knight for that dangerous pawn. And if they take the knight, now rook captures g2 is a check, which I overlooked the fact that that is a check. And so now when the king moves somewhere, we can grab that dangerous pawn, and we have a very clear win. But okay, that was a crazy one. My rating dropped down to 2096. Maybe the following game I have a chance to get to 2100. This game is much shorter to go over because it started as an exchange Slav variation. But then they fianchetto with g3 and intending bishop g2. I played e6, they castled. I develop. And so far all these opening moves look pretty normal. But then b4. And the engine actually doesn't hate this move, but I thought this was losing on the spot. And so I ended up spending almost 2 minutes on this move here. And basically, can I exploit White's advance here? a5 is a very thematic idea to try and undermine pawns that are advanced like that, but here it's not so great because they can push here, and what I really want is to get a knight to this outpost, but I wouldn't be able to because my pawn would be on a5. And I can't go there now because of course their pawn still guards that square. And so instead I realized that no, I don't think I can take advantage of this immediately. I play knight to e4, which the computer likes, queen c2, and a few moves later I end up playing pawn to f5, which I'm really a fan of this move, because it looks scary to open up your king for a lot of beginner to intermediate players. But we have to realize that usually this diagonal is the problem, and here we have two pawns that help shield our king. And the fact that this pawn is actually fixed to here as a pawn ram means that my king is actually a lot safer with the advance of f5 than it normally would be. The only real drawback is they might get a knight to e5, but that square is really heavily guarded, and so I'm not too worried about that being an outpost against me. And now I was very close to a winning position. I improved my bishop to b5, and now here comes the critical moment of the game. The engine likes queen to d1 is best, black is still a smidge better, but white is hanging on. Instead of that, they played queen to e3 in the game, and I didn't see why this move was the problem. I missed a winning opportunity, so see if you can find it. Pause the video and see if you can find the tactic that I missed. The problem with queen to e3 is actually there's pawn to f4 here, and I missed this move entirely. Of course, the point is that if they recapture, now bishop captures f4, pins and wins material. But instead of that, I played rook to c4, not seeing it, trying to use the situation to double rooks on the c-file, but my opportunity was blown and I really didn't get another chance. There was back and forth moves from both sides, but after 76 moves, a really long game, I lost by checkmate. And so that brings my rating down to 2088. Probably out of reach for one game, and I'm going to have to win at least 2 games if I want to get to 2100. But I am a man on a mission, let's try and get there. I start with d4, they play d5, we play a regular setup, but then knight to f6 is a little less common. I don't think it's as bad as the England gambit. You can take a look at this video here and how I punished that opening. But against d4, I do think this is probably one of black's worst opening choices that they can choose from. It looks like a poorly timed Grunfeld, where they would like to play g6 first, then the knight out, and possibly fianchetto after that. But the problem with this move order is white simply gets the center. We go here and then pawn to e4, or if you want to start with knight f3, I used to play that as well. But in both cases, white is taking over the center. They're going to have to move their knight back, and then we just control it. Our knight controls these 2 squares in the center, and then these pawns control all of those thanks to our pawn duo in the center of the board. In the game, they tried c5 to strike in the center, which is a thematic idea, but after d5, I simply keep control of the center. And this game ended up being a miniature after e6, really hurting their position, because now I have this really strong check. They're going to have to block on the d-file, and then I simply use the tactical opportunity to grab this pawn. They can't take back with their pinned bishop, and if they take back this way, then I have this really strong check. They're pretty much forced into playing g6. I have this common idea against their rook, and what I was expecting was rook to g8, but then I can just simply capture the e6 pawn, and they are definitely in trouble. Once again, they cannot take because of the pin. Perhaps they saw that, they chose to sacrifice the rook, try and get developed, but I'm going to trade here first, then take the rook. And the material is simply too much for them to hold. I try and continue development, they try and do the same, but eventually I'm able to just trade off pieces. Notice that as a check. And then after this, queen b3, they can't avoid the queen trade, and they just simply resign in 19 moves because of the material difference. So I'm back to 2096. Let's see if we can finally get to 2100. I'm actually kind of excited. I have an opponent that's about 2200, and so if I can win this game, I'm going to win 10 to 12 points and definitely reach 2100 with a little extra barrier. So I'm very excited to take down this player. We start with the Caro-Kann, and for Caro-Kann players, you may be familiar, there's a very theoretical endgame that can come up in the pan-off attack. This is exactly what we have. Opening theory continues like this, and then queen b3, the idea of adding pressure to this knight and this pawn. But I did mention this is a theoretical endgame, and so just like the Berlin defense in the Ruy Lopez, this has actually worked out all the way to an endgame. If you want to learn how to play that opening, you can take a look at this chess video here, but the point of this position is that we can actually afford to give up b7. We take on f3 first, ruin their pawn structure, and then play pawn to e6. And if they capture here, then knight captures this theory, they can give a check, we'll capture, and actually capturing back is theory, but is queen to c6 check instead and then grabbing here. That way it forces the king to e7 first. But in either case, they're going to win back the knight, material will be equal, and we'll be into this endgame position. Now if we go back to this position where I ruined their pawn structure, you may recall that e6 was the moves I mentioned going into that theoretical endgame. As a Caro-Kann player, it's kind of embarrassing that I missed this. It should be my bread and butter. I should remember this, but maybe in the heat of the moment, I couldn't remember opening theory. And I remember there was a knight captures d4, but that's the one move later. That's after you play e6. I tried playing knight captures d4 here, but without the inclusion of the e6 move, this is simply a blunder. Bishop to b5 check, and I don't want to block with my queen, so I pretty much have to take. Queen d7 is forced, but then I'm going to lose my knight. And so in 13 moves, I'm already dead lost. Very similar to that first game we looked at, when I ended up losing my queen to that fork. I'm in a really bad position, but I don't give up here. I try and hold on and give as much counterplay as possible. We're on move 13, and let's teleport all the way to move 64. The entire game I was down the exchange, and then I recently equalized material, but this pawn is really advanced. I'm definitely playing with the advantage of time, but with just a rook, I'm happy to salvage a draw here when I was completely lost out of the opening. I give a check, they go here, and I actually thought we might have perpetual check by force. The game kind of goes like this, and then with only 9 seconds left, I don't blame them for just repeating the position and taking the draw. And I'm happy to give it to them, because I was completely outplayed and I don't really see a way to make progress. Now if we had a lot more time, white actually did have a way to escape the perpetual checks and try and get this pawn going. But I certainly didn't see it, and I don't think they did with the low time either. After this move, white was correct by going here and then the check, but they played king to b8 when the engine leg's actually coming up to b6. And if I try and stop the pawn from promoting, they can actually make progress by finding shelter with their king. Remember that this bishop defends the pawn, and so if I sacrifice my rook for the pawn, then their bishop and pawn is going to be enough to try and escort that remaining pawn into a queen. And so basically they just have to try and block all of the checks. Probably the only defensible idea is for black to try and swing their king around this way, and then with the king guarding, it frees up the rook. But if I try that, they can go here, my king shields themselves from the checks, I can come around, but now they're escorting their pawn, and they're more than happy to sacrifice this. And once again, black is actually completely losing here. But we didn't see this in the game, and I was very happy to get away with the draw. So now my rating is 2098, and so let's take a look at the final game. The one where I finally won and crossed 2100. This one was exciting. I start with d4. They play knight f6, we continue with this, and then they play the old Benoni defense. Objectively best is not to take that pawn, we just simply push, and then they play e6, which is a very common opening move. Benko Gambit players will recognize that you can play b5 here, and if they take, and then a6, and then you take again, this is the Benko Gambit fully accepted. If we go back, some other common moves are d6 to stop my pawn, or g6 and then trying to fianchetto shadow their bishop really early. As you know, they played e6 in the game, I played knight c3, but now on move 4 they played a move that as soon as they played it, I thought this has to be a mistake. And I'm glad to see that my assessment was correct. Knight to a6. And I really don't understand the point of this move. It looks like I can just grab the center with e4, and this knight is just on the edge of the board doing nothing. White is already winning the game. And in fact, the top engine move is e4 here. But I was still in the mode of trying to really capitalize on this mistake, and I thought that maybe the inclusion of the e6 move here was the way to do it. My idea was d captures e6, and they don't really want to capture back, because then I can trade queens on d8, and then black has lost castling rights. I probably play bishop to f4, and even though we go into an endgame, I feel like white has a slight advantage. And if they instead capture back with the f-pawn, now I can play pawn e4 with the center, and this diagonal is now forever weak. Now what they really need to do is play d6. That's a very common move, but here it is needed because they have to stop me from advancing with e5 and grabbing even more of the center. Their knight is already on the edge of the board, they cannot afford to let me grab even more of the center and push them back in space. But they do not see that threat, they just try and develop and probably get castled. But now pawn to e5, and this knight has nowhere to go except back to g8. Can't go here because I take it with the pawn. Here my knight would take the free knight, and their knight cannot go to these two squares because of my queen. So back to g8 it goes. Reminded of Yasser Seirawan saying that the piece is going back to the hospital, meaning its original starting square. And so now I choose to develop, but with a very sneaky threat. Bishop d3 is objectively best because it's a good developing move. It helps me prepare castling, but much more importantly, if they don't see the danger, say they go here and attack my bishop, I have this really strong idea of this check. And if they play g6, I am happy to sacrifice here, because if they go here, I'll win material. It really is almost like a pseudo-sacrifice. But okay, my opponent is 2000s, they're not going to miss that one move check. So they play g6 themselves, stopping my queen from going here. But now I have the center, black is behind in development, and severely behind in space, and so I can develop at my leisure. The top engine move was bishop to f4, but I don't really like that move. Maybe it's objectively best or deterring d6, but it's not in the spirit of the opening I had. The spirit of the position here is that white is much better, and we're really going in for checkmate. Bishop f4 might be good, and it is a developing move, same with knight f3 the computer also likes, but both of those moves we could play anytime, and there's no rush to play either of them. The move I much prefer, and the one I played in the game, was bishop to e4. Because they're already really behind in development, this knight cannot go to either of these squares, and the bishop is basically entombing this piece. This rook is similarly out of play. This knight is just sitting here on the edge of the board, and so the logical piece to bring into play was this bishop, and I thought it would probably do so by fianchettoing like this. And so the point of my bishop to e4 move is to simply pin this pawn so they cannot continue developing. Once they're fully tied down, then I can develop at my leisure. They try bishop g5 because when you're down in so much space, it's usually a good idea to trade pieces. It helps free up your position, so I understand their need to try and trade pieces, but I'm in no mood to help them by trading on g5 and letting them bring out their queen. So I go knight to b5. The idea is this very juicy d6 outpost, make them lose castling rights, and then their king is forever a target in the center. They try queen a5 check to make me lose castling rights first, but I have an idea here that I've seen many times before. Before I show that idea, I just want to comment, knight c3 does block the check, but that would undevelop the knight from our idea, and that's probably what black is hoping for. Similarly, if we block the check with the bishop, they can trade on d2, and then sure, we can trade everything off into an endgame, but their king is a lot safer with the queens off the board. And so what move am I referring to that I've seen many times before? In similar positions, it's king to f1. I don't mind moving my king and losing castling rights, and my king is actually safe enough behind my f-pawn. My rook may look buried back here, and even this knight is undeveloped, but quite simply, I'm not planning to go into an endgame where that matters. We're going after their weak king immediately, and the idea is get my king out of danger just long enough that I can get this really strong check in and start going after their king early. It's also worth noting that my king is relatively safe because of my c4 pawn helping shield it from checks on that diagonal. Okay, they capture on c1, and before a recapture, I wanted to play knight d6 check. They went e7 with their king, and now it was actually good to capture back with the queen, because then I'm also threatening the check and infiltrating. But I had a slightly different idea in mind. I was thinking about not capturing this at all. What happens if I move my queen to f3? I'm setting up this really strong check here, and there's actually a really cool variation I want to show. If they try and retreat their bishop, they are up 3 points of material, but after this check and forcing this way, the real clincher is bishop captures b7. You don't want to capture back because then that royal fork. So if you save your rook instead, then queen e8 check forces the king out. Bishop captures here, black is under a severe attack. One of the top engine moves is actually rook captures b2, but then knight b5 check, and then objectively best is just to give back the rook. There's just simply too many threats and possible ideas to checkmate. In fact, we don't even capture this rook right away. You play this check first, coming up to here would be checkmate, and coming back, you're just losing even more material. Something like this, the queens are coming off, white is up in material, and definitely in a winning position. If you didn't even want to trade the queens off, c captures b5, leaves them with a lot of problems with their king. Okay, so we're threatening this check. How can they defend against that? Knight to h6 looks like a valid try, so this is no longer a problem, but this actually walks into a different problem, which is queen to f6 checkmate. And so yes, 14 move miniature, and this was the game that crossed me over 2100. It's a really exciting milestone. I'm happy to share it with all of you, and hopefully my chess journey has been helpful for a lot of other people as well. Thanks for stopping by, everyone. I'll see you in the next chess video.